time once again for Community Forum, and we're very lucky to have back with us live in the studios this morning, Kshama Sawant. Kshama Sawant is Seattle City Council member and member of Socialist Alternative. Kshama, thank you very much for coming in and spending time with us again.
Thank you for having me, Michael. Good morning.
Good morning. So let's start out. There's a ton to cover since you were last on, and boy, are things happening since we have someone new in the White House. But I want to start out with talking about gentrification issues here in town. And local photographer Alex Garland had a great post on Facebook a couple days ago where he stated, "How can we have the two richest men in the same city as a homeless crisis?" His answer was avarice. So, and I know you were, speaking of Mr. Bezos, one of the two richest men, you were actually spending part of your day yesterday in front of Amazon. So I'm wondering if you can talk about that and talk about the bigger picture here.
Absolutely. And as you said correctly, Michael, we are really in a historic period of social movements that is just beginning. And a lot of the people around us have become politicized because of Trump getting elected and sort of jolted people into action. But really, this sort of churn in history with the millennial generation really rejecting the status quo preceded Trump getting elected. And what's happened instead is that Trump has been elected at a time when people are not in a mood to accept him as president. And that's what's positive about this era. And as you said, in people's minds, the local issues in Seattle are not disconnected from the larger fight against Trump, against the right wing, and against the billionaire class. And I agree with Alex Garland, who made that brilliant Facebook post. This is really an obscene and shameful situation where you have the two, the richest, wealthiest people in the entire world, Bill Gates, who is well on his way to becoming a trillionaire. And can people even imagine what that means? And Jeff Bezos, who's now increased his wealth enough just this last week to become the second wealthiest person. And both of them live in the greater Seattle area. And this is an area which has had unprecedented growth, GDP growth rate in excess of the national average, and buildings going up everywhere, upscale condos and apartments. You can't walk 5 blocks without having to see a construction crane. And yet we are seeing increasing poverty, increasing unlivability. The housing affordability crisis has just reached a choke point, and homelessness is at an alarming and inhumane increase. And so the question really is, why is this happening? I agree with Alex. I mean, it's the avarice of extremely wealthy people, but it really comes from the capitalist system itself. It's systemic components of the way this economy works that allows this kind of absurd situation where you have some of the wealthiest people in the world living in the same area and in an industrialized country that is the wealthiest in the history of humanity, and yet you see homelessness going up. That is why yesterday, when I joined workers at SIS, which is the security company that Amazon contracts with, I was there in solidarity with those workers who have been demanding their workplace rights, including labor law of Seattle, but also their basic prayer rights. Many of them are Muslim immigrants, and they're facing such repression at the workplace. I mean, people find it hard to believe this is Seattle in the 21st century, and yet these workers are being impacted in ways that seem so anachronistic. And so they've shown tremendous courage. You know, they don't have a union. They're fighting for a union. And so we were there. That rally was the workers, the people from the Labor Council, including Nicole Grant, who is the leader of the labor movement here in the Seattle area, and SCIU Local 6, which has been playing a really important role in helping to unionize those workers. And what we said there at that rally yesterday was that we're fighting against Trump. We stand with immigrants who are going to be facing massive repression in the form of workplace and home ICE raids. And if you recall, Michael, we organized the Free Daniel rally, and Daniel was just released from after weeks of being held in detention by ICE, even though he has the legal right to be in the United States. But Daniel is not going to be the only one who will be impacted. We're not going to be able to fight this on a case-by-case basis. I think every legal help that is offered is absolutely critical. But ultimately, we are not going to be able to beat back against ICE raids unless we build a mass movement. So that was part of our message there. We're in solidarity with immigrants. We're in solidarity with workers who are fighting to unionize. And ultimately, we cannot have isolated struggles and isolated campaigns. We have to build to a crescendo of mass resistance that includes nonviolent civil disobedience. And so the primary message that we were delivering was we are going to organize massive actions on May 1st and that everybody should join us. May 1st or May Day is International Workers' Day. In America, it has had historic value as Immigrant Rights Day. Throughout the nation, but especially in states like California, hundreds of thousands of immigrants and workers are going to be walking out or striking or protesting or engaging in nonviolent civil disobedience, demanding a different kind of society. And I urge everybody in Seattle, whether you have a union or not, whether you go to work and get a paycheck or not, if you have a stake in fighting for a different vision of Seattle in America, then you should be out with us on May 1st.
I believe SEA was having a vote just the tail end of this week that we should know the outcome on Monday as to whether to join that strike or not.
Yes, SEA, the Seattle Education Association, the union that represents public school educators in our city, have just shown tremendous courage and also just an understanding of what it would take to fight against Trump. But also, this is a union that has been engaging in a valiant struggle against the chronic underfunding of public education. This is a union that courageously went on strike in 2015, and I walked with them on the picket lines, and we had a rally in city council chambers in solidarity with the union. And at the picket lines, the educators weren't talking just about themselves. They were absolutely demanding a fair contract, which is their right. But they were primarily talking about the needs of the students. They were talking about how outrageous it was that Seattle, being such a wealthy city, was still home to an increasing number of students who were facing racial disparities in discipline in schools and facing homelessness and hunger at home. This is just not acceptable. And the teachers were out there on the picket lines fighting for them, fighting for full funding of public education in opposition to the state legislature's complete and utter inaction in funding education. And so the question really that comes up for us in Seattle, statewide, nationwide, is what is the strategy? How do we fight for education? For example, the question I would ask is, why hasn't the state legislature, Democrats and Republicans, why haven't they fought to tax the wealthy? Why haven't they fought to tax big corporations like Amazon, like Boeing, so that we can create funding for public education? We're not a poor state. The problem is that the wealth is consolidated so unbelievably in the hands of a few corporate executives and billionaires that they also own the political power. They control the corridors of government. And so ultimately, you don't see these two political parties. There is admittedly fundamental differences between the two parties, but ultimately, neither of them stands for the interests of working people, for the interests of public education and the broader social interests, including housing affordability. So I think what our history in the recent years in Seattle has shown that we have achieved tremendous successes in pushing back against the status quo only on the basis of building mass resistance, mass movements that does not allow itself to be beholden to what's acceptable to corporate politicians. I mean, we won the historic fight for 15 in Seattle and in SeaTac the year before only because movements refused to accept council members and other politicians in this area who said, well, 15 is too presumptuous, you shouldn't be asking for 15, or we may not be able to arrive at that this year, or we'll have a wage increase, but it won't be 15. No, workers refused to accept that. I, as a council member, refused to accept that. And the way we won a unanimous vote was by fighting back against that and forcing politicians to vote the right way. That is how we won many tenant rights, and we're getting ready to also fight for more legislation on tenants' rights, going towards a full Tenants' Bill of Rights. But the only way we will be able to do that is if we are clear that we win only if our movements refuse to accept what is presented as possible by corporate politicians. If you rely on them, you're not going to ever change anything.
So, what is the key for dealing with, for instance, developers and landlords in town? Developers appear to still have the upper hand, even though there's been like minor gains with them. As well as I just saw last night on social media that your friend Carl Hagelund is looking at raising the rents and forcing some more people out at some of his facilities.
Yes, thank you for mentioning all that. I mean, gentrification and housing unaffordability are now the main crises. I mean, there's just an unimaginable unaffordability in our city. Whether you look at home prices for those who are actually considering, lucky enough to consider putting aside down payment for a mortgage loan, or if you're a renter, either way, things are hard. But things are especially hard for renters. But if you look at the whole housing market, it's let's look at the overall housing market. Not only are rents skyrocketing and homelessness going up. Recently, the Seattle Times reported that 40% of the ownership homes that are being sold in Seattle are being sold for $1 million or more. And the numbers get only worse when you branch out to Bellevue or Mercer Island. 95% of the homes in Mercer Island are being sold for $1 million or more. This is so outside of even the realms of imagination of ordinary working people. How many people, what proportion of Seattle's workers make anywhere close to the amount of money, amount of income that you would need to be able to afford homes like that? What proportion of Seattle makes the amount of income that you would need to be able to afford the average rent for a 2-bedroom apartment? If you're a family with 2 or 3 children, how do you do that? How do you live in this city? And more, the people who work in this city and make this city run are being forced to live elsewhere. And more people are moving out. Yes, more people are moving in, that's true. But the people who are able to live here are increasingly people who have very high salaries. And I think that if we are to make life affordable in the city, then we have to take dramatic steps. And let's start with simple things. Just a few weeks ago, the city council voted on the University District upzone. And we argued, Councilmember O'Brien and Councilmember Herbold led on this. We argued that we should extract as much affordability as possible under the framework of the HALA committee, which is basically the housing policy committee that was crafted by the mayor. And we were all told that you should just buy into HALA because that's the best way, that's the only thing that we're going to get. I don't agree with that. I support everything that is part of the framework of the HALA committee, but I don't think it goes nearly far enough, and I'll talk about what I think should be done in Seattle in a second. But even if we stay with just the HALA process, the way the vote went on the U District upzone on the city council also shows that even within that framework, to squeeze out the maximum affordability is not the goal of most politicians. So when the proposal to increase the affordability within that framework, accepted framework, was brought up, it was only council members Herbold, O'Brien, and I who voted yes for it. How is it possible that we have such a burning crisis of affordability and we don't even have a city council that is willing to do the bare minimum to expand affordability? This is a problematic situation. If we are talking about the policy changes that we need, we have to start with first the lack of accountability that we have among the corporate politicians on the city council. How did they get away with doing this? Why wasn't that a majority vote? To me, my message to all your listeners is that it should be a reminder that we need to build a powerful movement that holds the feet of politicians to the fire and demands accountability. And the way you demand accountability is not by sending politely worded emails to the city council members, which that's fine. If we should do everything that we can to communicate our message to them, but ultimately we're not going to get what we want just by asking politely. We have to demand our right, and we have to build enough of a movement that has this that can have the power, sort of sway the balance of power towards renters and towards ordinary working people, towards small businesses that are reeling with the cost of rent. and away from the landlord lobby, away from the real estate industry, away from Wall Street speculators who are increasingly investing in real estate in the United States and in Seattle, and away from Amazon, which is a behemoth in Seattle. So I think that unless we talk about affordability in housing in association with the movement, with the resistance that will need to be built, we are not going to get that kind of affordability. The writing is on the wall. With little policy tweaking here and there, we're not going to change what Seattle is becoming, which is a playground for the wealthy. So I would urge your listeners, let's think seriously about it. For a moment, think about what kind of vision do you have for Seattle in the next 10 years? If your vision, which I would wager is the majority vision of Seattle, the vision of the majority people, which is a city that actually is affordable for everybody, and that homelessness is eliminated, and transit is expanded, and traffic snarls are eliminated. If that's your vision for the city, then we're going to have to fight for it, because right now that is not the way things are going. And you will hear many politicians, including Councilmember Burgess and others, say that, well, this is a supply question. We don't have enough housing. Well, let me speak for a moment as a PhD economist. Yes, we need more housing, but that is not the barrier here. The barrier is the affordability of units. So how does it help to increase the supply of housing if the majority of the new housing units in the form of apartments or condos are increasingly out of reach for ordinary working people? And so wealthier people move in and ordinary working people get pushed out. That is not solving the problem, even though supply is going up. That is actually allowing Seattle to become a playground for the wealthy. So I would urge people to get away from such voodoo economics and just look at reality. You don't need to be an economist to recognize that simply increasing supply does not solve the problem. We need dramatic shifts in policies that are specifically geared towards affordability. So I would say one of the things that John Grant, who's running for for City Council seat number 8, which is being vacated by Councilmember Burgess, one of the things he's argued, he's had a long track record as a housing affordability advocate, as the former executive director of the Tenants Union. And one of the points he brings up, and many housing advocates have done this too, is if we're serious about affordability, then 25% of all new units should become affordable. That is way far from what the mayor's committee has recommended and what the city council's majority is willing to fight for, like 3 to 5%. Look at the divergence between those two numbers. So we need a big proportion of the new units to become affordable. So just from an economic standpoint, unless that happens, the city is not going to become affordable. But we need more than that. We also need rents to be brought into reality from the stratosphere. So we need rent control. And economics shows that rent control works. Again, I'm speaking as an economist. But how are we going to get all this? I mean, just take rent control as an example. The state legislature banned rent control in 1981. And I was reading some of the history of this. That ban came as a response, a right-wing and pro-corporate response, which both Democrats and Republicans colluded on, as a response to a failed ballot initiative on, attempt in Seattle for rent control. And so the question is, how will Seattle enact rent control? The ban needs to be repealed. How will the ban be repealed? Is it going to be repealed if we use until eternity the failed strategies of begging Democrats like Frank Sharp to change it? No, it's not going to change that way. The only way it will change is if we build a mass movement of renters in Seattle that continues to demand rent control. And already in the last 3 years, there's a sea change from many people having swallowed the myths, of the supposed dangers of rent control, to understanding that actually this could work. In fact, if you remember, Michael, in 2015, Nick Licata, former council member, and I did a debate on rent control against Manuela, a Republican senator from Ellensburg, and Roger Valdez, who's a lobbyist for the real estate industry. And it was an important event. We need more politicized events like that, where we clarify the facts around rent control and empower ordinary people, whether they're homeowners or renters. If you have a vision for social justice in Seattle, then we should join the movement for rent control. And it's very important this year because John Grant, who's running for City Council seat number 8, and which is a citywide race, and Nikita Oliver, who's just launched a campaign against Mayor Murray, they're both going to be fighting for rent control as part of their campaign program of policies. And what's important also is that both these candidates are pledging to run as independent of the Democratic establishment and are pledging to not take a penny of corporate cash, just like I did. And we've shown that it is possible to run campaigns on that basis and win, and also get into office and win policy successes, but only on the basis that we use our office as an amplified voice to build social movements, as we have done in my office. So that message is essential, and I would urge people to check out these two campaigns and join the movement for rent control as well.
Yeah, I know John Grant was, I believe he was on the committee or the review board for HALA.
He was the only one who abstained on that vote, actually.
So, and unfortunately, with the vouchers out, I know people can contribute to the races at city council level, but unfortunately, they can't contribute to the mayoral race when it is obviously solely needed at this point in time. So, one of the I attended week before this last week a event in the University District about an initiative to raise taxes on those people making over $250K. Is your office getting involved in that at all, or watching from the side, or what?
Yes, my office is very much a part of the coalition that is fighting to tax the rich. And not only that, my organization, Socialist Alternative, is strongly in solidarity with the coalition. And we actually, if you recall, Michael, when we ran our campaigns, both the election campaign in 2013 and also the re-election campaign in 2015, but especially in 2015, tax the rich was one of the most important slogans of our campaign. So we're very serious about using common sense policies to address the inequality, but with the full realization that these policies are not going to get enacted simply because they make sense. You're not going to win these things just because you're making rational economic arguments any more than we won 15 for that reason. We won 15, yes, winning 15 had lots of rational arguments on its side, but that's not how we won it. We won it by building a struggle against big business and against the corporate politicians. That is what we're going to have to do here as well. And so the coalition, which is composed of many truly grassroots organizations like the Transit Riders Union, like the Neighborhood Action Councils that got formed after Trump got elected, the Seattle Education Association itself, the educators are part of it, and many other unions are part of it as well. And so community organizations, the labor movement, and my office, we are all in solidarity with one another that we need to tax the rich. And you know, I find that when I talk to working people, young people on university campus, in my neighborhood, I talk to people at the grocery store all the time, I have never heard anybody question like, oh my God, that's an absurd idea. You're talking about tax the rich. People's response is, yes, absolutely, please do. In fact, even many well-off people will say, yes, I agree with this. And I know I'll probably be among those who will get taxed, but I think that's the correct thing to do. So we have a real mandate from the majority of the voters and the public in Seattle. And so the task will be how to translate that public mandate into actual action on the city council. It's not going to be straightforward. That is why we have this coalition. That is why we are building a movement. The coalition has already had one town hall. They intend to do a town hall in every district. The town hall in my district will be happening soon. And I'm going to be spearheading that in solidarity with the coalition in the month of May. And as a matter of fact, one of our messages on May 1st, we're fighting against Trump, we're fighting for immigrants, but we're also fighting to make Seattle a place that everybody can live in. And so one of the next steps that we want to propose on May 1st, we want to make May 1st the launch of a summer of resistance, but how do you build that summer of resistance? It can't be in the abstract, right? We have to fight for concrete demands. And so in Seattle, I would urge everybody not only to come out on May 1st, but also join our message. That one of our messages on May 1st will be, let's tax the rich in Seattle. Come to the town hall in around mid-May. I'll be announcing the date soon. But let's hold the city council accountable. We've heard a lot of statements from city council members and the mayor that they're against Trump, and I completely agree with them. We want Seattle's politicians to be anti-Trump, anti-billionaire class, and accountable to not just immigrants, but all working people, all voters. But it's not enough to just make statements on those lines. We have to show through our action as elected representatives that we stand with working people. And that is why part of the message of the coalition is that we are trying to build a Trump-proof Seattle. So when Trump tries to, and his administration try to act extortionary, like, the message from Jeff Sessions that, oh, well, we'll be cutting funding to sanctuary cities, although I don't think it's legally or technically straightforward for them to do that. But the point is that even if they were to do that, what is our solution to that? We can't solve the problem that is faced by our city and by our country the problem of right-wing policies by going on the defense. I mean, political strategy. I'm an organizer. I know that from my own experience that the way to fight to keep the gains we have won in the past is actually to not just be defensive. We have to wage a defensive struggle, and I would urge everybody to take seriously what Trump is threatening, because he's shown that he's willing to go to vicious ends against working people, against unions, against women. But the way to win in that defensive struggle is to have a positive approach to it, meaning an offensive approach, meaning not just say what we want to say, what we have, but actually say, you know what, we're going to fight for something more. We're going to fight to make Seattle affordable. We're going to carry out campaign of policies that makes Seattle affordable for everyone. And from that standpoint, the tax the rich policy will be very, very crucial to show in actual terms how we fight Trump and the billionaire class. And as you've seen in recent times, some of the historic shifts that we've made in Seattle, like the Wells Fargo divestment, like the $15 fight, it has the potential to go nationwide. And I would say that if we succeed in taxing the rich in Seattle, I have no question in my mind that it will resonate with activists around the country.
Which is why I think we're probably all expecting a major infusion of money against such a campaign from outside the state, outside the city. Talking with Kshama Sawant, she is Seattle City Council member and a member of Socialist Alternative. And very quickly, there is a conference tomorrow that I believe you are speaking at. Is that correct?
Yes. We're having a Socialism Conference at UW Kane Hall starting 10 o'clock, and the conference is being co-sponsored by Socialist Alternative, Democratic Socialists of America, and other groups. And we're hoping that people will join us for a really exciting discussion. We have 2 panel discussions, very important discussions. And the first discussion is going to be how to make Seattle the center of resistance against Trump. And I will be speaking. Nicole Grant, the leader of the labor movement, will be speaking. John Grant will be speaking. Nikita Oliver will be speaking. And other union representatives will be speaking, and socialist students will be speaking. So I think it's going to be an exciting event, we're not just going to have rhetoric, but concrete actions, proposals, and we're also going to talk about why May 1st is important. And a big participant in our actions in UW is going to be UAW, the union that represents the graduate student workers, who are also taking a strike vote to go on strike on May 1st. And they're an inspiring example, and I would urge people to join them on May 1st.
All right. Well, with that, we are unfortunately out of time. I want to thank you very much for coming and spending time with us again.
Thank you so much for having me.